everybody, and welcome to the Football Philosophy channel. And it's the second leg tonight, the AC Milan tie in the last 16 of the Europa League. Obviously a 1-1 draw at Old Trafford means we've got to score there. We need to get at least one goal to at least take it to extra time. A 1-1 draw would still see us in the tie. A 1-1 draw would take it to extra time, and in extra time, away goals still count double. So you're sort of in the driving seat, even with a 1-1 draw. Obviously, you'd need to score again, really, without it, to prevent it from going to penalties. But a 1-1 draw wouldn't be the end of the world over 90 minutes. So we do have to score at least once, obviously, preferably without reply. And to go to a place like the San Siro and play AC Milan, obviously you can hope and obviously you can plan. Can you really expect to score much more than one? Can you expect to score 2 or 3? It's not often we get 3 goals in a game. Pretty rarely this season. Probably, 7 or 8 times in all the games we've played have we scored 3 or more. So is it a lot to expect them to go? They can do it, of course they can. But is it too much to wish for us to go there and win, say 3-1 and to go through 4-2 on aggregate? 2 goals, that's not out of the question. Obviously 2 goals would give us a great shout because it would give us 2 away goals compared to their 1 away goal. Obviously we'd have to not lose. If they were to beat us 3-2, the 2 away goals would be useless. But I think our greatest chance of getting through is to keep it tight and to nick a 1-0 win. That is our best chance of getting through this tie. I would suggest that is more often how teams get through, by winning tight games, 1-0 or 2-1 perhaps, when they've only, and it's not uncommon either, it's not uncommon for a team to draw the first leg of a European tie on the home ground and to go away and get an away win. Not when it's only the 1 goal win that's needed. It's not that uncommon. There's no reason why United can't win this game 1-0 or 2-1. And I would suggest that 1-0 would be the most likely outcome if we are to win this game. Obviously, it could be 2-1. I'm just saying it's more likely that a 1-0 win. We have been keeping it tight at the back. I don't see any reason why we can't keep a clean sheet. And then nicking 1 goal would be enough for us to get through if we've kept that clean sheet. So what's our best way of going about that? What's the best way of actually getting a goal? Quite a lot of people on Twitter, and I've been discussing it with people, have been saying we need Paul Pogba to play. If he's fit, Paul Pogba's travelled with the party, is in the squad. In no way, shape or form is this aimed at any given player. It really isn't. I'm just literally explaining that goals can come in so many different manners. Lots of people saying we need the creativity. There's no creativity with McTominay and Fred in midfield. I've seen people saying we need more creativity in the team. How much creativity in a team do you need if your actual target in the first instance is to win 1-0? You get goals in so many different manners. Headers from corners. Only recently against City, Luke Shaw ran all the way up the field and passed it to Rashford and got it back from Rashford, and our left back scored a goal. Obviously, we got a penalty in that game from one of our forwards, dribbling it into the box and getting us a penalty. Goals come in all different manners. We've just beaten West Ham at the weekend. It was an own goal, for example. So, as much as, and 1 or 2 people have said to me, you've got more chance if you've got more creative players. I'm not even certain that that's necessarily true. You might think, what are you talking about? It's not necessarily true that you've got more creative players. Your team needs to play well. You need to look after the ball well. You've got more chance of getting a goal from 3 or 4 or 5 good passes from your team as a team, or a quick breakaway that doesn't necessarily need a particular creative player to give a quick breakaway. If we've got Dan James playing, for example, or Marcus Rashford on the opposite flank, It could be his fullback who puts him away on a chance if we're under pressure and we get a breakaway. Only at the weekend we had a breakaway. A lot of people are having a go at Dan James because his pass to Bruno was a little bit behind him or straight at him when it should have been in front of him. You know, that breakaway came from Dan James nicking the ball off the opposition. It wasn't down to any creative play. Goals can come in so many different fashions, and your creative players can come to the fore, of course they can, but relying on them, that's the thing that people seem to be getting so hung up about. You know, we need creative players, we're going to miss such and such a creative player. If we haven't got enough creative players, we won't score a goal. There's plenty of teams out there scoring goals who haven't got players in their team that we would say we'll have them, that's a creative player. There are plenty of teams out there, you know, obviously they've got players that they consider to be creative players, but all these United supporters on Twitter are saying we need that player, we need the other player. There's other teams scoring plenty of goals without the players that they would consider are as creative as our players. You know, there's teams scoring goals with players who our fans wouldn't consider are as creative as the likes of Paul Pogba or Bruno Fernandes, for example. How many creative players do you need? And to win a game 1-0, which is probably our target from the outset, do you need any creative players at all? When I got thinking about this, I thought, let's have a look, because the main subject here, by the way, is if Paul Pogba should play. Like I've said, and I mean this wholeheartedly, I'm not aiming this at Paul Pogba. It really isn't against Paul Pogba. I've done a little bit of mathematics here. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be before I did it. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I just thought, let's have a look at the last 10 games that we've played. The reason that came to my mind is one of the lads on Twitter, Johnny on Twitter, said, you know, look how many goals we've scored recently without Paul Pogba. So I thought, okay, I will have a look at how many goals we've scored recently without Paul Pogba. But then I thought, if you're going to do that, it's only fair to look at how many goals we were scoring when Paul was playing. And that took me mind racing a bit further. And I thought, well, how many goals are we scoring when any of our midfield players are playing? So I've looked at it. And what I've done, pardon the handwriting, but what I've done is I've done a little table, and I've written down one side all the matches that the different midfield players have played in, and across the top the midfield players. So then in each column, like for example the first game is West Ham at the weekend. I don't know if you can see that. So there's a 1 against West Ham, we scored 1, and then I've written players across the top. McTominay played in that game, so he gets a 1. Fred gets a 1. Bruno gets a 1. I've included Dan James as a midfield player. I thought it'd be interesting to see Dan's figures, so he gets a 1. But Matic didn't play in that game, so he doesn't get anything. And Pogba didn't play in that game, so he doesn't get anything, and so on and so forth. So they've all played in completely random games because obviously, you know, in some players' lists there's big gaps. In Matic's case, for example, to complete the last 10 games that Matic has started, you've got to go all the way back to Sheffield United away. Sheffield United away is 10 games ago for Nemanja Matic. So it's obviously random games. It goes back over quite a time span just to look at how many goals we score in 10 games with a player playing. In other words, you know, recent form has been mentioned, how many goals we're scoring recently. So I'm looking at how many goals we've scored with each given player playing in his last 10 games. And the results came out like this. In the last 10 games that Bruno has played, we've scored 15 goals. Now, don't forget, these players, it's random because Bruno doesn't always play. Well, Bruno plays nearly every game. Matic doesn't always play with Fred. Fred nearly always plays with McTominay, but not always. So there's different games. It's a random amount. It's not a random amount. It's 10 games each. But the random games, they come along at different times and over different time spans. So in the last 10 games that Bruno has played, we've scored 15 goals. in the last 10 games that McTominay has played in, we've scored 15 goals. In the last 10 games that Pogba has played in, we've scored 13 goals. And in the last 10 games that Matic has played in, we've scored 13 goals. And in the last 10 games that Fred has played in, we've scored 12 goals. So it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really mean anything, and it definitely doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that we can't score goals. It doesn't mean that when we play AC Milan tonight, if such a player plays, we've got more chance of scoring a goal. It doesn't prove that, and it doesn't prove we've got less chance. It doesn't prove anything like that. But what I believe it does show is, don't hang your hat on we need such and such a player to score, to play, because if he plays, we can't score any goals, or if he plays, we've got more chance of scoring some goals. And I know lots of people will probably say, yeah, but which games did he play in? Are some of them tough? If you take Paul, for example, okay, he played against City in the League Cup, he played against Liverpool in the FA Cup, he played a game against Arsenal, but he also played in the games against Sheffield United and Fulham and Burnley, the sort of game, you know, all in the bottom four at the time that we played them, 2 of them in the bottom 3, the sort of games where you think you might get a few goals. So it's a random amount of a random span of games for most of the players. Dan James, by the way, interestingly, in the last 10 games that Dan James has played, we've scored 20 goals. We've scored 20 goals in the last 10 games that Dan James. He comes out well on top. There's a couple of things I'd like to point out about that. His numbers are boosted by the fact, because if you go back 10 games for Dan James, 10 games ago we played against Leeds, so he played against Leeds when we scored 6. He's also played against Real Sociedad away when we scored 4. So both of those 2 games are in Dan James's last 10 games. So although that sort of unfairly boosts his figures because we scored a lot of goals in a couple of games that he played in, is it just a coincidence? I mean, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm genuinely asking the question. Is it just a coincidence that we scored a lot of goals in a couple of the games that Dan James played in? I'm always banging on about we need to start putting games to bed. We need to win more games by bigger margins. We need to win more games by bigger margins. I've said that time after time after time. So he's only, in 2 of the last 10 games that he's played, we've won 4-0 and we've won 6-2. It might only be a coincidence. Of course it might. But it's still something that we need to try to achieve. We need to try to start scoring more goals and winning more games more comfortably. But interestingly, if you think of it this way, in most of the games, the maximum we score is 3. You know, there's only 2 games. I'll come to the Southampton game in a minute, by the way, how I covered that. The maximum we've scored is 3. So even if you take the Leeds game in which we scored 6 and only allowed 3 of those goals, and if you take a Real Sociedad game in which we scored 4 and only allow 3 of those goals, it takes 4 goals off Dan James's total, but it would still leave 16 goals on Dan James's column. It still comes out on top, even if you take 4 of the goals away from the 2 big wins, and I think that's more than fair. So it's at least interesting. I think it's at least interesting to hang your hat on a certain player. We need this player to play, is more creative. Well, in recent history, because it doesn't matter what somebody's done. If you're going to talk about, yeah, but he did this or he did that and we scored so many goals so long ago, if you're going to start looking further and further back, you might as well say, well, get Paul Scholes to come again to bring his boots. We used to score loads of goals when he used to play. You need to look at recent form, and this goes back easily far enough to say this is recent. It's even more than recent form. It goes back far enough. So there's no evidence. There isn't any evidence there. It's a team game. We need the team to play better. We only need to score 1 goal, and there's no evidence there whatsoever to say that we've got more chance of scoring that goal if player A plays rather than player B. Fred's at the bottom of the list with 12. Forget Dan James, he's a winger anyway. McTominay's at the top of the list with 15. McTominay and Bruno. Bruno plays a little bit further forward as well. But in the last 10 games, if you take McTominay, who's a proper midfield player, in the last 10 games that he's played, we've scored 15 goals. In the last 10 games that Pogba's played, we've scored 13. Matic, 13. The last 10 games that Fred's played, we've scored 12. Even from 12 to 15, the span's not that massive that it makes such a massive difference that it means, right, we've got a much more chance, maybe a tiny little bit more chance. It can only just be a coincidence, by the way. If you do the same thing, the figures are... Look, if somebody's figures are 10 or 15 better than somebody else's, you've got to sit up and take notice and say, wow. But when it's such a fine dividing line, such a small margin, like I say, bottom of the list is Fred with 12, top of the list is McTominay with 15, in 10 games, 3 goals. If you was to take the next 10 games that Fred plays and the next 10 games that McTominay plays, it might be the other way round. It's such a fine margin that it's almost irrelevant. It needs to be much bigger than that to be able to say, wow, look at the difference. Look how many goals we score when he plays compared to when he plays. The margin is too small. There's no difference. There's virtually no difference anyway. So there isn't necessarily any more chance. The figures would need to be bigger, and maybe you'd need to cover it over a longer time span. One of two things would have to happen. If you're just going to cover 10 games, it needs to be that, we scored 20 with him playing and only 10 with him playing. That's a difference. Or even if the differences are quite small, it needs to continue over time. You need to go 10 games further back and say, well, in the previous 10 games to that, we also scored 3 more. And in the previous 10 games to that, we also scored 3 more. It needs to be either A, continuous over a longer period of time, or B, over a short span like this, it needs to be a lot bigger gap. So to pin your hopes on one player and say we need that creative player to play, in my opinion, and like I say, I didn't know how this was going to come out. I really didn't know how this... I've worked it out, and I've worked it out after I've said what I've said, and I believe it backs up what I'm saying. You don't have to have a creative player in your team to score a goal. We're scoring goals at a similar rate, whichever players play in midfield. We need to get the team right. We need to get the better players playing more often. You might think they're the better players. If they are the better players, it's not showing in this little list at the moment. When I say the better players, when it comes to creating goals and the team scoring more goals. So that brings me to the game tonight. What will the team be tonight? I don't think Paul will play, by the way. He's only just come back from injury. I think he'll be on the bench. Obviously, Martial hasn't travelled. Cavani hasn't travelled. I think we're going to be a little bit lightweight up front. I'm going to name the team that I think he'll pick. Not the team that I quite go with, but I think he will go with... I'm not even going to guess at the goalkeeper, and I don't think it's that. Of course it's important. I was about to say it's not important. Of course it's important. I think he'll stick with Henderson. Go on, I will have a guess. He'll stick with Henderson, but it's not that. I don't think it's that relevant to how the team plays and our chance of scoring the goal that we need. But I think he'll stick with Henderson and give De Gea a game at weekend, probably in the FA Cup. I'm convinced he'll go back to his best back four. It'll be Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, Maguire and Shaw. I've got no doubt about that. I think McTominay and Fred will play. He goes with McTominay and Fred in every important game. I'll be shocked if it's not McTominay and Fred. Bruno at number 10, obviously. And I think he will go with Dan James on the right again, Rashford on the left, and Greenwood at number 9. That's what I think his lineup will be. What would I do? As I've just explained, I think you only need one goal. I'd like it to be a tight game. Your one goal can come from anywhere. I would make it tight. I would pack the midfield. I'm sure we can get the goal that we need. You can also change it. So long as you're still in the game, you can also change it with 20 minutes to go or 25 minutes to go. If you haven't got the goal that you need, hopefully 20 or 25 minutes to go, you're hanging on to the goal lead that you've got. But if not, you can change it and go for it then. Going for it early doors could cost you too much, I think, in the long term. I would suggest you should pack the midfield and try and nick a goal and then hang on to it later on. I would go with the same back four. I'd go with Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, Maguire and Shaw. I would put three in midfield. I would put McTominay, Matic and Fred in midfield, with Bruno playing as like a withdrawn number 9 and Dan James on the right and Rashford on the left. That's what I'd go with. That'd be my lineup for tonight, and I'm convinced that lineup could keep it tight enough, make a real game of it, and with the pace of James on the right, and obviously we spoke about not relying on the odd moment of brilliance. Obviously it can get you out of trouble at times. Maybe that odd moment of brilliance, because he does do it occasionally, could come from Marcus Rashford tonight, or perhaps from Bruno. Or, as I've just said, your goal could come from any source. It could be a header by Maguire from a corner. You know, it could be a header by McTominay. He gets some headers in, or a shot from the edge of the box by McTominay. It doesn't have to be a player who people talk about as being an especially creative player. It can come from all sorts of different, in all sorts of manners and from different angles, different situations. I believe we can win there 1-0. I still think we've got a chance if Ollie picks the team that I think he'll pick. But personally, I'd play it a little bit more cagily and have 3 midfield players in there and just a two out and out forwards. Bruno at number 10. Either way, I hope we get through. I've said on Twitter during the pandemic, I've been living from game to game. I can't wait from one United game to the next United game. If we go out tonight, I said this as well, obviously I want United to stay in. I want United to win every game they play. I want them to win every trophy they can. But right now, during this pandemic, living from game to game, I'm desperate for them to get through so that my future Thursday nights are not spoiled. So come on United tonight, let's get the job done. Just remembered one other thing. Just thought I'd had this bit on at the end. I said that I'd mentioned the Southampton game. I forgot to come back to it. The Southampton game, we scored 9. And I decided this before I looked at it, by the way. I thought we played against 10 men against Southampton. They had a man sent off after 2 minutes. I thought it's unfair to include that game. Whoever played in it, I thought it was unfair. So just for your information, against Southampton when we scored 9, McTominay and Fred were in midfield. If you were to include the Southampton game, McTominay's figures would go up to 24 and Fred's would go up to 21, and they would both be the highest 2 figures by, well, McTominay's by some way. But I decided that before I looked. It didn't matter who played in that game. They had 10 men. I think we were always going to win it comfortably. Bruno also played in that game, but McTominay and Fred have not played 10 games since we played Southampton. Bruno's actually played in 10 games since we played Southampton. So that Southampton game wouldn't be on Bruno's figures if we included it, but it would be on McTominay's figures and it would be on Fred's figures. But like I say, it's a bit of an unfair advantage, I think, a game where you score 9 because the opposition are playing with 10 men for virtually a full game. So I hope you've enjoyed that show. If you've enjoyed that show, please tell all your friends. Please subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, don't tell anybody. Keep stum.